To Shaman's Way. This is our 16th episode, and today I believe we're talking about curses.
Curses indeed, Doug. Not bad for a number 16. We made it to number 16. Woo!
We're ticking through them for sure.
We're ticking through them, and you guys have been listening for 16 episodes. Thank you very much for your kind attention and for checking out our words. So I know that one, possibly 70 of our listeners have maybe thought about what curses were or wondered if curses even existed. And, a little bit about me is I grew up in the center of Alberta. I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a completely Catholic Christian area, and there was no such thing as curses in my life at all. I'd never even heard of it. And then I started to do more and more healing work, and I started to do more and more soul retrievals, and I would find different things along the way. So I would be going to journey to find out about a soul piece that was lost by a young woman. And in turn, I'm just using this as an example. This isn't a specific journey, but there's been so many journeys like this. Here's my example. So I've gone to journey to get a soul piece for a young woman. And the spirits take me back to her mother, because her mother has a soul piece for her. But then her mother's mother has a soul piece. And then her mother's mother has a soul piece. And often we go back various generations. And I got to recognize from that pattern that we have generational occurrences. We have many elders who talk about whatever you do affects 7 generations after. And whatever you do now will affect 7 generations behind you, or however many generations. In line with that, oftentimes I have been set upon to find something in the spirit world, whether it's to find luck, whether it is to find wealth, whether it is to find love, but there's a trace of something that's missing. Some of the most fascinating experiences I've had are being led to graveyards in the spirit world, which is actually kind of like an oxymoron, because, why would you need a coffin in the spirit world? Because it's the place of the dead. So, but I can appreciate the symbolism and the sense of humor that spirit has with me, and sometimes I have to be given the obvious in order for me to get the what is not so obvious. So if they give me a graveyard, I'm like, ding, ding, oh, I recognize this. This is, my conscious brain is going, ding, 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 recognize. There must be something significant if I recognize a graveyard, ding, ding. And then, of course, there's that inevitable way of seeing just that one gravestone or that one cross or that one mound, and ding, ding, ding. So run off I go. And this is like tracking. So this isn't tracking in the middle world. This is like tracking soul pieces in the lower world, or tracking different things. So eventually, as you can guess from the way that my story is going, I have tools and implements magically appear in order for me to dig up a grave, in order for me to get enough of the soil out, in order to lift the coffin lid. And I must say that perhaps I have watched too many horror movies. Perhaps I have, thanks Marta, perhaps I have watched too many or read too many stories about ghosts, that I have seen my share of things that pop out of graves to startle me. If I said I screamed, that would be a lie. If I said I didn't jump, that would be a lie. So at times I have had experiences with curses that I didn't know was going on. In one of the cases, I lifted the lid of the coffin, and within that coffin there was a very small rounded or rolled up piece of metal with nails in it. And I had no idea what this was, but what I spiritually got from it was that the man in the coffin had been a thief and was killed for thievery. The family that he stole from went to a professional curse maker. The curse maker, in essence, this curse was, "May you forever be poor." And my patient in my healing room had struggled with money issues for the entire life. And that was where the curse of money or lack of money had originated within the family. So various things happened. That is a specific thing, but more graveyards are not very specific. They happen a little more often than I tend to think about. What I wanted to do after these experiences was understand how is this? And first of all, what was that metal thing that I saw? When I see something that I've never seen before in the physical world manifest in the spiritual world, if I think it has a counterpart in the physical world, then I'm going to try and see if I can find it. What I found is that archaeologists have found inscribed metal tablets. They describe curses that have been placed on others. And these ancient curse tablets are known as defixions. I love that word, defixions. And I was like, ooh, I can remember that one. It's fun to say, defixions. The messages they contain usually seek the gods and the spirits to hurt, harm, or bind up an enemy. So we have bound and enslaved spirits. Archaeologists also find on these tablets, they find them actually quite useful, providing unexplained evidence into the religious beliefs or the practices, the use of language, social interactions, and the influences of the ancient magical arts. It's interesting that many of the sheets inscribed generally fall into 4 major categories. And if you're a tarot reader or a psychic or even a seeker, you're going to recognize these 4 things. And these are the 4 most common curses. The first one is to seek justice or vengeance. The second one is about marriage, love, or sex. The third was circus and theatrical performances, which we can now take into competitive rivalry. How many times have, oh God, let me just win this race. Oh, whatever, here's a green candle, may I just have this bounty. The other part of it was witnesses in court. May they be confused, may they be silent so their testimony is not given. Now there are artifacts that point that wood, wax, and papyrus have been used for curses. However, they deteriorate at a far quicker rate than metal deteriorates. Nearly every tablet, and this really was quite surprising to me, nearly every tablet had been rolled up and buried. So to get to a little bit of mythology, because I love mythology, the children of Nyx, so the goddess of night or the goddess of darkness, Arya, she gave birth to darkness. And she also gave birth to curses. So they come from a mythological perspective. Curses come from the darkness. The rolling of the metal is symbolic of binding the recipient. Bringing it and putting it in a powerful place such as a graveyard essentially puts it in the other world. Oftentimes, there were nails through it. So that could be for extra binding or to pound the message home, so to speak. And some of these small cylinders had upwards of 9 nails or 9 nail holes in them. No one was impervious. Every single class had a curse. This is a curse that I found from a 3rd century AD. This is what was rolled up. I found it quite hilarious. O thundering and lightning wielding God, cast down and bind Babylos, the green grocer, who lives in the neighborhood of Mygdonius, where Hermia bore in her womb. Just as you destroyed the chariot of the Pharaoh, destroy his soul. Just as you choked the firstborn in Egypt, so choke up his children. Bind together his animals, his donkey. Let them overturn and fall apart. Let them be unable to move from this house day forth. Now, quickly. So here we've got somebody who was obviously felt that maybe he was ripped off by the greengrocer a number of times and was so mad that he went to a professional curse maker and said, this is what I want written, weigh it right, pound it on, and that's an example of a curse. I mean, it sounds like you took my mother truck and parking stall. May the gods curse you for parking stalls forever and ever. Amen. Get in an accident, you blah, 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 right?
And it's pretty elaborate.
It is pretty elaborate. It doesn't leave anything to the imagination, does it?
No, definitely not.
No, and make it now, God. Make it now. Apparently, patience is something we have struggled with our entire human history. So the tablets were often rolled and nailed, and like I said before, perhaps a nail impressed a greater pain or a greater suffering. In love spells, the nail was used so the recipient would obey the rules, even if they never saw them. Where they were placed was just as important as what was written on them. Often buried in graves, such as the one that I ran across, the graveyards are the chthonic stronghold of a deep body of water. And probably this is where Babylos, the greengrocer, drew his water. So it is someplace relevant to the recipient. They have found curses for the tax collector where the tax collector's office would have been. So things are placed in places where they're important. However, many of the defacciones have located in graves taking advantage of this is a word that I really quite like. It's the miasma, miasma, and it means noxious exhalations, from that body decomposition. And it means dangerous or foreboding or death-like atmosphere, an oppressive atmosphere. So they would bury their curses in this so that it was believed that it would generate in these places, and so close contact between the decaying and the dead and the cursing tablet would engender or enhance the pollution to the intended victim, all by sympathetic as well as empathetic magic. So the curse would be unlocked by the mysterious mist of the miasma. The dead would be the agent of the cause. If the dead died violently, perhaps the activation of the curse would alleviate their afterlife pains. These are, things that have been found in shrines and found in temples. Speculation, I found really quite interesting. Speculation is that the written spells were a direct lineage to spoken spells and also to memorized liturgies. So we have rhythm, we have cadence, we have sound. And what it proves to me is that the migration of spiritual practice became an aspect of evolution. So were the spells then also the spells that the priests would use upon the people. The objects that they had, objects could be cursed, not just people, but objects could be cursed. One, if you look at Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are probably the two most well-known demonologists. I mean, Ed Warren is dead now, but Lorraine is still alive, and their daughter and son-in-law run their haunted museum. They have artifacts that have been cursed in their house, and they have a museum just off to the side of the house, and they have objects that they've removed from people's homes and people's lives that made the person who owned them their life a living hell, including reading one of the accounts of Ed Warren. There were 3 separate incidences that he recounted during his interview, where once they had an object in their car, 3 times there were accidents. Each time there were blowouts of the wheel. One other time there was I think something had happened to the engine just before the wheels had blown, because the wheels blow on each of them. So 3 times these cursed objects had enough energy to want to kill the individuals who were transporting them from the place where they got their food. So they got their source of energy by feeding off the people who owned it and who were afraid of it. So these curses, these beings that were cursed perhaps, were intelligent enough to know wherever they were going to be, in all likelihood, cut off from the source of their nourishment. So that is an application of curses in the world we live in now, in the world that is available to us in 2016. So that speculation of the written word. So curses, intrusions, spells, contracts, vows, intentions. Words are very powerful forms of expression and powerful energies. When words are combined with intense emotion, the emotion acts as a fuel for the word. So the greater the emotion, the greater the fuel. The intention puts into motion universality. Life force is also fuel. So we talked about the history, and we talked about what was important to people in respect to their cursing. So the love, the justification. But cultures also have done incredible sacrifices to add to the extreme power of an intention. We don't live in a culture such as this, and so the thought of that is foreign and primitive. However, there are many cultures that still use a form of sacrifice to ensure the power of ceremony. Chickens in Africa are often used in ceremonial practice and then used to feed the community. Even the church still refers to the blood of Christ and the body of Christ in their sacraments. And Jesus is referring to the sacrifice he made of himself in order to save others. I bring this up because as I said before, I often find dealing with the issues during my soul retrieval work. I deal with the issues of curses. Sometimes the person has tried everything to heal. They've read books, they've done workshops, they've gone to allopathic and alternative practitioners, but in honesty, their condition persists. They have chronic pain, misfortune, or failure. So not only was the curse, in my eyes, my shamanic eyes, found in this lifetime, but the progenitor is found in another lifetime. In shamanism, it's important to successfully unravel this condition that has persists and hopefully restore health, whatever that looks like or whatever that means, to a client. I believe that, well, from my perspective and shamanism's perspective, time isn't linear. Past, present, and future all pretty well happen simultaneously, which is why you can journey in the past and you can journey into the future. If there was a spell, a curse, oath, promise, declaration, vow that was created in another lifetime, this has a huge amount of life force with it. And it is very likely that the life force is still alive and activated in the client's energy system. One of the things I hear a lot of is, well, if I'm cursed, I don't know about it. It doesn't affect me at all. I don't have an effect of this. Or I hear, the other people ask the opposite. Can I do a curse? How do I do a curse? How do I create a curse? So I've heard both sides of it. I've also read of individuals who have practiced another religion going into another country. So they've gone into a country as a missionary. And one of the practices of the witch doctors is to place curses at the doors of the Christian church. So they'll do the bones, the stones, whatever it is that they use. And oftentimes what I've read is that the Christian missionaries will come and use their foot to just scamp it away and say, I have no belief in this whatsoever. So I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, in that, does a modern day curse have any effect? Or is it as, effectless as that particular person, that particular missionary kicking that curse aside? I honestly don't know. What I do know on the other side of my mouth is that we have lived with the effect of curses that were placed upon our family, and we're still living within that particular effect of that curse. There was a really interesting man by the name of Adam Crabtree, and he wrote a really interesting book called Multiple Man. And he wrote about the phenomena of curses in terms of family or group mind. So in that essence, that group or that family mind has kept this family is cursed, but nobody remembers actually what happened. As he was working with this, he describes how Shamus, a spirit of one member of a Celtic family, carried the family misdeed from generation to generation. So this is a case of possession and not necessarily curse. But I believe that the spirit was cursed, henceforth couldn't go into the afterlife or couldn't go into the other life. So obviously whoever cursed Shamus knew what they were doing. That's the difference, I think, between a curse somebody reads out of a book and a professional curser. I think that there's quite a bit of difference. But that's not really the topic we're going for today. However, so Shamus, as his host died, he would just join another family member. Kind of like the spirit of addiction. How many times have you seen the spirit of addiction run through a family? I think it's similar in that regard. And in this host, Shamus would live in the host until they died and so on. And the family didn't remember the misdeed, but it was commonly known that the family had been cursed for centuries. When Shamus was brought out of the spirit world, so out of the family field, the group mind is what Adam Crabtree described it, Shamus then told the story of the misdeed, and once told, Shamus mourned the pain and suffering caused by the misdeed, and at this point the curse was lifted and the family finally began to heal. So I found it really fascinating that it would elude itself or become itself, that families suffer some type of ancestral malady, as do many countries. I believe we ultimately are experiencing this on some level. The atrocities committed by Canadians in trying to exterminate the First Nations people has trapped in the spirit world an incredibly large wound, or if you prefer the term, in the collective unconscious. And within this collective unconscious or national spirit wound are hundreds or thousands of families who have been plagued with this wound as part of their family field. Assuming this to be true, it seems that finding this wound and releasing it would initiate a new way of being in the world for these families. Furthermore, instead of committing ecological suicide as a nation, we might become conscious of the consequences of our reactions and reverse the deleterious direction we have set for ourselves upon this world. the Hatfields and McCoys, if we ever think about, are there modern examples of people who are curses? They're a classic example that's feuding is passed on energetically to the offspring. The offspring then are raised in an environment that automatically we see fault and we disdain the other family just because of the name. Now think of the countries that have been feuding for centuries, the vows, the curses, the spells that have been cast because of the intense feelings that caused by enormous amounts of bloodshed. So blood is also an example of the life force. Emotion without blood can be just as binding. Fear can create power over a person or persons that can live for centuries. The fear of burning in hell, for example, has always been a controlling device and has proven amazingly effective, harmful, and invasive. If you want to control people, scare people. Just like what they're doing right now. But that's a whole other story. So I want to wrap up the idea of the curses, and I want to talk a little bit about how you recognize the energy or how you recognize the nature or the pattern of a curse. And I'm not sure if I would feel comfortable telling you in the next couple of minutes how to relieve a curse. So if there is enough interest in this particular podcast, perhaps you would like to leave a message on either where you find it on iTunes or your other favorite, or go to shamansway.net and leave a comment. I will happily do a follow-up on the aspects of curses. I haven't even spoken a little bit about what I think about them, what my experiences have been, and I've had some very interesting experiences. So in closing, I hope that there is enough interest and enough people come forward and say, hey, I'd love a part 2, because I would really be quite interested in doing a part 2. So back to you, Doug.
Excellent, thank you. And I don't know how much of it will come across on the mic, but as we were going through the curse discussion there, the thunder was rolling in louder and louder as we went, so it was a fitting background.
Very fitting background.
I suspect a couple of those will sneak it into the podcast, but no, that's very good. As Kriket mentioned, we do check our comments if you leave them on iTunes, and it helps us get our podcast out there if you do, and leave a rating there if you can. And otherwise, we've got lots of resources at shamansway.net, as also mentioned. So until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Have a good night.